All right, we are live.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Atheist Republic Sunday morning hangout. I'm Makisha. And today with us we have Andrew, Armin, Erasmo, Ray, Ren, and again myself, Makisha, going along the bottom of my people row here. Today we're going to talk about atheism in the workplace, religion in the workplace, people's experiences with being atheists at work, how it affects you, if at all, conversations maybe you've had with religious people, ways you felt influenced, and apparently I'm very tongue-tied this morning, so hopefully I won't have to talk much. So let's start off. Maybe it might be helpful if people know what country everybody lives in, so that there's maybe some context for the stories and the comments that people give. I'm in Canada, and as is Armin. And Andrew, where are you located right now?
I'm in the UK now, but I had worked previously in the Middle East and in Saudi Arabia, to be specific. So I guess I'll talk about that. There isn't much to talk about my work experience in the UK. It's been otherwise smooth when it comes to my atheism.
And you're originally from Lebanon, is that correct?
Yeah, originally from Lebanon.
Okay. And Armin, you can give a little bit. Did you work anywhere else besides Canada?
No, I actually have very little experience with this, so I think I'm going to let other people share their experience unless I have a question.
Great. And Erasmo, where are you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, I'm from Mexico, Chihuahua, Mexico, to be exactly. Do you want me to talk about my experience about sharing my status as an atheist in the workplace?
Yeah, definitely. We'll after we get through everybody, I'll ask if anybody wants to start by just giving a brief, maybe story about their experiences, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
But first, I want to give some context for where everybody is from. Ray, where are you at?
I'm from Indonesia. Okay, that sounds weird. Okay, I'm from Indonesia.
Indonesia.
Yeah.
And Ren, how about you? Where are you at? You're muted, so I'm not sure if you're talking or not. I'm not sure where Ren is from. Oh, there we go. Unmute.
I live in California now, the U.S. I'm from Alaska, so
Awesome,
not
thanks.
very highly religious places.
Okay, so let's start off with maybe just if anybody has, I know Erasmo wanted to talk a bit about his experiences with this topic, so let's just start there since he has some thoughts. Go ahead. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Well, personally, don't have an experience per se, but it matters how much you can see many workplaces that have so many religious essence to it, and by essence I mean that they must have at least a cross hanging on the wall, or they must be look like saying I love God or I love Christ, and if you love God and if you love Christ, you are welcome to go and serve you. You can even see crosses or virgins hanging out in the gas stations, and it's really awkward and bothersome when you are just trying to fill out your gas tank in your car. Or if you want to go to a restaurant, you can see a sign saying, God is our #1 client. It is somewhat stupid, bothersome, uncomfortable, at least for me, but a lot of Mexicans are agree with this idea. And
So Mexico is predominantly Catholic,
mhm,
is my understanding, yes?
yes.
And so maybe that's another angle that we can also take with his experience. Sorry, go ahead, Armin.
But do you get does it affect your job if you're an atheist in Mexico? If you're open about your atheism, could you get could it be harder for you to get a job, or could you lose your job if your boss knows that you're an atheist?
Most definitely, yes. Right now, I have to make two different versions of resumes. I have resumes both in Spanish and English, and even in Japanese. But I have to state they have to state different versions in which I must say I'm an atheist, and other versions that I must write that I'm not, or just point that out. Otherwise, I can just be rejected from the get-go.
So it's expected that you would state your religion?
Not exactly. It is more like a laissez-faire relationship. If you share with people that you are an atheist, you are prone to be judged and prejudiced by other people. But it is supposedly to be legal to be atheist. It is part of the freedom of speech after all. But people will still judge you. You will get prejudiced after all. And like I said, you are prone to be treated differently just because you have different ideals or different philosophies of life. It's like saying, well, I respect you're an atheist, but I don't want you near me. Did I make myself clear?
Yeah, I think, and that's something that we've talked about in, I think some blog posts have been written as well about this, and how there's a difference between kind of a covert bias and an overt bias, where there's definitely places where people are just outright, you will be fired if you're found out to be an atheist. And then there's obviously a lot of other situations where it's expected that you're going to be religious, and if you're found out not to be, it can make things uncomfortable for you, or there's certain expectations that are just sort of understood. So I think is that sort of what you're saying, that in Mexico it's just kind of assumed that you're going to be Catholic, and if you're not, it makes it a little bit challenging. Is that, sorry, Erasmo, is my understanding correct of what you were saying?
Not sure. Can
That's
you
okay.
repeat the question again?
That's okay. That's okay. I was just clarifying that sometimes and I just wanted to be clear that in some places it is actually legal to fire somebody for being an atheist. In other places, it's more just a social construct.
Well, I know in the Philippines, you mentioned that you say on your resume if you're an atheist or you're not. I know in the Philippines, I've seen a lot of resumes from the Philippines, and one of the top lines is religion, Roman Catholic. And for me, it was very surprising to see so many people include their religion on their resume. And somebody suggested to me that the reason why they put this there is to just clearly communicate that they're not Muslim. Because a lot of people don't want to hire Muslims in the Philippines, so that's why you would put that line in there so that people feel safe with regards to that. But I don't know if that's the real reason or not, but that was just, but I know that it's very common in the Philippines to include your religion on your resume.
Whereas that would not be, you wouldn't do that in North America at all. That would be very weird. Andrew, what are some of your experiences in workplace, or things you've heard, or things you know?
Sure. I'll mostly cover what happened in Saudi Arabia, I think, because that was probably the most extreme. But just so when it comes to resumes, it's completely normal and in fact expected to include your religion. And often when you're applying to a position online, there'll be a field for you to insert your religion. And so, that was definitely a bit of a culture shock for me. And it's expected, so you can't, and there is no choice in the drop-down for none or atheist. In fact, that would be akin to suicide if you were to be public about it. But we were discussing before we went live. I was telling the guys what it was like on a day-to-day basis working in Saudi Arabia. So the place that I worked in was the administration building, which was attached to a larger factory. And on every floor, they had built in a musalla, which is a prayer room. And attached to the prayer room is a special washroom where you would, so you have to, there's an entire process involved in cleaning yourself before you pray in Islam. And so these are built in to every workplace. Every workplace has a prayer room, and come prayer time, which happens 5 times a day, not only does the whole city shut down because you're expected to be praying, but at the workplace it's a common thing for someone, it's encouraged in fact in Islam for you to walk around and collect people for prayer. So on a regular basis someone would, at least 2 times a day, I'd have someone knock on my office door and say, do you want to come and pray? And so I've said in earlier Hangouts that Andrew is not my actual name. My actual name is an Arabic name. And that Arabic name in specific can be seen as a Muslim name. So for them, it was assumed that I was a Muslim, which I'm not. I come from a Christian family. So they would knock on my office door and expect me to come and pray with them, and then I would have to explain to them that no, I do in fact come from a Christian background, which is borderline acceptable and grounds for turning down prayer, obviously. But it always left you a bit ostracized because 99% of the population there is obviously Muslim, and they all go pray together. And so you can imagine how this would weigh on you day in, day out, being expected to pray with the group, and then when you're not, you see them leaving together, and then they come back together. So for them, it's very much a bonding experience. And you're obviously left out of that, for whatever reasons, whether you're an atheist or a Christian, or as long as you're not Muslim, you're not praying, you're obviously going to be left out of that. And so that was definitely bizarre, and it took some getting used to. But that's just one experience in Saudi Arabia. I'll leave the floor open for other people to chime in, and there are other few experiences I could describe later on.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that's sort of what I was trying to allude to a little bit before as well, is that there is something actually quite powerful about that presence of religion when it's so visible and so present, even if it's not, oh, if you don't do this, you're going to get fired. I think sometimes we forget about how significant that is, and it's the same in school or which is why I think some, amongst other things, but why I always feel so strongly about creating these environments as secular spaces, because it really matters. It has an effect on people. That kind of feeling of ostracization. That's a hard word. Being ostracized by your peers. I'm interested, Andrew, actually, while you're unmuted, is it common for people to, or have you heard stories of people or know people who have believed they've been fired for that, for not being the right religion?
Yes. Right. So Saudi Arabia is predominantly Sunni, as opposed to Shia. So the Sunni-Shia divide. In Saudi Arabia, it's obviously very Sunni. And so there's this belief, and I don't know how true this is, but that Shias are discriminated against in the workforce. So in order for you to work in Saudi Arabia as a foreigner, you obviously have to apply for a work permit. And in doing so, if you're an Arab, by virtue of your last name, etc., they can pretty much tell if you're Sunni or Shia or Christian or whatever it is. And so there's this belief that in Saudi Arabia now, they will not hire you, they will not give you a work permit if you are Shiite, because, and that plays into the whole geopolitical thing. Shiites are considered to be allied or in line with the Iranian play for regional dominance as opposed to the Saudi Arabian play, etc. So yes, I mean, people do believe that, and I'm certain that it's true on some individual level. I don't know if there's a government policy about it, but but I did manage to get a work permit as a Christian, so it's not. There is no policy against it, but you certainly feel like a second-class citizen in the sense that the whole environment caters towards that one specific sect of that one specific religion, and you're just an outsider to all of that, and you always will be, whether in the workforce or in society at large. So yes, I would say that people do believe that there is definitely discrimination in the workforce. How overt it is down to individual experience, obviously. I wouldn't go so far as to say that there's a policy of it, but it would certainly appear so.
It's a hard thing to prove too, so
Yeah.
it's kind of unless it's actually like in the books. It's a hard thing for people to prove that that's what happened. Anybody else have experiences they want to share directly? And we can move on to other topics if we feel like we've exhausted this one. As some of the people who had stories they wanted to share aren't here, so I'm happy to switch gears if that ends up needing to be the case. But we can talk now about any other experiences anybody has, stories they want to share.
Well,
yeah, Ren.
If Ren, okay, go.
I was just going to say that, like Charisma was saying, in the West, we have legal protections for overt discrimination, but, and that might keep you from being killed over religion, but I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of discrimination, be it religious, gender, whatever, almost all of it we never know about. Even if we're the ones being discriminated against, we don't know about it. It's little decisions that people make in their minds. Am I going to hire this guy? Am I going to offer this guy a raise? Am I going to promote him? These kind of choices that employers have the freedom to make, and that other people have the freedom to say, turn you on to a job, recommend you to other people, give you a good recommendation. These are all things that people can and do apply discriminatory principles to. And so it matters a lot everywhere, I think. My own experience with it was I've only had one experience where religion became an issue, and it was shortly after I got on Facebook and realized that there's atheist communities and people that actually talk about this stuff. I got all excited about all the memes and all the stuff that I found there that was people saying what I had been thinking all along, and my enthusiasm for that, I was posting a lot of stuff about it, and I had disgruntled employees who stalked me online and put together a little. My boss is pretty much not aware of how Facebook works, or he's not a techie at all, and so they put together a little email for him with some of my silly pictures that my enthusiasm for that I was posting.
Sorry, we've got some new people popping in, so I'm sorry, Ren, I hate interrupting you, but since we have new people popping in, I just want to remind everybody, please keep your mics muted until you're ready to talk so that your background noise doesn't interrupt anyone. Thanks. Okay, go ahead. Go on, Ren.
So they put together a little email. My boss gets this email, and there's pictures of me with tinfoil hats and Usiks and all this silly stuff that I've posted on Facebook, along with posts about atheism and stuff, and they send it to him with the impression that this is how his company is being represented. He doesn't know enough about the technology to know that my Facebook page is not his company page, and that people who go looking for his company don't find that. And that if they did, they would recognize that people have individual rights to live a life separate from their employer's interests. And so I had a big blow up with my boss about this, and he was all on me about not just about the pictures, but about the atheism specifically, that you should keep that stuff to yourself and you should not be sharing that kind of thing with, you know, that's none of anybody's business. And I was pretty upset about it at the time. That's why I'm Willie Woodhaller now, was to get off that radar. And I'm still pretty upset about the fact that that all happened, because I'm sure he's not going around to the rest of his employees while they're working with his customers and checking that they're not wearing gold crosses and things like that. You know, this only applies if you're an atheist. It doesn't apply if you're a Christian, you know, and that hypocrisy of it pretty much torques me. But it is what it is, and that's the only time I've ever run into it overtly. But I expect that we all suffer some discrimination that we don't know about. So, anyway.
Wow, that sucks. I'm sorry. Are you still with that job?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been 2 years, and things are really weird. They've been in a holding pattern because my boss lives a long ways from here, and I'm the manager, and these people, basically it was that I found out they were stealing, and that's why they were disgruntled. I fired them, and then he hired them back, and I'm not sure whether he did that based on we're good Christians, we would never do this kind of discrimination against the data that I showed him, or if it was more of a negative view of me or what. But it's been a strange couple years.
Yeah, that's a really hard environment to work in. I'm sorry you had to go through that, or are going through that. I think also I wanted to draw out a point that you made that I think brings a little bit of clarity and maybe can help direct the conversation as well, is the pervasive feelings toward atheists within and throughout a society that might not necessarily always be related to like direct policy about the workplace or whatever, but that influences how people get jobs, who gets jobs, who's thought to be a person that someone would want to hire. We're seeing a lot of statistics. I don't know if anything's come out new. Maybe, Armin, maybe you know more about this, but about people's overall opinions of atheists in America, and in particular, I know we posted something about that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I do know I was really struck by how negative the opinion was of people toward atheists, and that obviously affects your job experience, and most of us spend a lot of time in our jobs, and so that has huge ramifications. We had somebody else who wanted to pipe in. I saw in the chat. You can just unmute yourself. I'm sorry. Anirudh, did you have a comment still?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, see, it's not different in India as well. So, although I'm not working anywhere right now, but I can gladly pitch in a few points about how atheists are viewed in India. I've already sent it on one of my posts earlier. The way that atheists are called in India, they're called Nastikas, which is basically non-existent. So being an atheist is linguistically a crime back here. And I've been to a few internship places, and every day in the morning, even though I don't like it, I have to pray to some deities before I get into the work. So, and the people who don't do that, well, you can pretty much assume what happens to them.
So let me, there was a little bit of background noise for a second, so I just want to maybe restate what you said, that when you go to work, when in many places, I assume in India, you have to pray to the deity of that workplace. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. So, let us assume it's an industry that manufactures steel. So it will be to the goddess of safety. That we call her Durga Mata here. So yeah, you have to pray to her before you get into the work. Otherwise, the head who would be training you, he'll give you a very hard time through the day.
So that's is that, I assume that's sort of by the workplace, like each company or each place of business is allowed to sort of make up their own general expectations about that? Or is that is that protected by law?
No, I don't think there's anything dictated by law, but yeah, I think that might be added to the law soon, given that we are India is currently being ruled by a Hindu nationalist government.
Wow, that would be very difficult. How does everybody handle these kind of situations when you're expected to either socially or even you know that it could cause you problems with your job or with even family, friends, whatever, when you're expected to say a prayer, make a pronouncement, bow, I don't know, whatever the case may be. How have you handled that? Has anybody experienced that, and how do you handle those situations?
It's a very terrible situation to be in India because there are very few people who are atheists, and the few atheists who are there, they prefer to be quiet under the blanket, so to speak. Let us say I live in Chennai. It's a city full of temples, and there's a city close by called Tirupati, which you might be which is very famous around the world. But my family, we frequently go to that place, and so I've been an atheist only for so long, and now it gets really difficult to convince them that I don't want to go there. So when I say no, I'm not comfortable going to those places, it gets really difficult to convince them.
Sure. Andrew.
Yeah. Hey. So to answer the question you just asked, Makisha, way back, maybe this is about 10 years ago, I was working in a hotel in Malaysia, and because I spoke Arabic, anytime an Arab guest would show up, I would be asked to basically take care of them, translate, just generally be their go-to guy at the hotel. So there was this one particular guest who would come down for breakfast every day with his wife and 2 children, and his wife was quite obviously pregnant, and he was there for a good 2 weeks or so, and then I think about 2 weeks into it, he came down alone for breakfast once, and I asked him just to make conversation where the family was, and he told me that his wife was feeling very unwell, and that he was a bit worried about taking her to the hospital because he didn't want to leave the kids alone, and so he asked me if it would be okay if I took her to the hospital. So obviously I went and checked with my manager, and he said yes, that's fine, take her to the hospital. Long story short, she ends up having a miscarriage, and that's why she was feeling unwell. Just to backtrack for a second, this particular guest was from Qatar, and he was a Muslim, and so was the rest of the family. So I take the wife to the hospital. She has a miscarriage, and we're informed that she has to have an operation. She can't fly back home without removing the fetus because there's a risk of blood poisoning. So fast forward about 2 days later, I've spent the night in the hospital with them, because none of them spoke any English. So I was translating for them and taking care of things essentially. And then I had to prepare the whole burial procedure because they weren't allowed to fly the fetus back as well. And so we end up in a cemetery in a place in Malaysia which is about 2 hours drive away from Kuala Lumpur. And this whole time I hadn't told this man that I am not a Muslim. He's under the assumption that I am a Muslim, and I didn't think it was a good time to bring up my atheism with the guy. He had just lost a child, and he was obviously pretty distraught. And so we end up in the cemetery, and he needed people to pray along. So a group prayer thing over the stillborn. Well, it wasn't even stillborn, just a fetus. And so I walked around this village in Malaysia, knocked on doors, and sign language prayer to these people. I said, can you come? We need to pray. Managed to gather around 10 people, and we walked back to the cemetery, and I helped him cover up the fetus with sand, and then they started to pray, and he looked over at me, and I had no idea what to do. I'd never prayed before, and so I knelt when he knelt, stood up when he stood up, and just followed his cue. So there was a half a second lag between what he was doing and what I was doing. And so those of you that are familiar, there's a rite to this. So you have to touch your face at certain times. There's certain ways you gesticulate. Things that are said. I had no idea, obviously. So I managed.
Did we just lose Andrew's sound, or is it just me? Andrew, I think I'm getting some glitches from your sound. Is everybody else?
Yes, same here.
Okay.
But that was such an interesting story.
I know. Okay.
Andrew.
Hopefully Andrew's buffering will fix itself quickly. I keep hoping he'll just catch it. He'll just start. I'll just hear him.
Usually it just gets fixed within a few minutes, so I think we could. I just want to comment on this whole prayer thing in Islam until Andrew comes back. In Muslim countries, it's actually it's a little bit more difficult to hide the fact that you're an atheist because you have people that are religious today. So if you are a non-religious person working in a religious environment, then it's really, you really can't hide that unless you play along, because when we Christians, you just have the Sunday prayers to show that you're Christian, but if you're a Muslim working in an Islamic environment, you just have to everybody just going to prayer, and if you don't participate, it's because
Okay, now Armin has frozen. This might be a Google Hangouts situation. Oh, now there's two of Andrew. This is fun. Okay, so Andrew, can you try to yeah. Are you back?
Sure.
Yes, awesome. Okay, we'd love to hear the rest of your story.
Where did I leave off though? Where did you get choppy?
You were talking about the different things that you had to do during the prayers, and there was a delay between what they did and what you did.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So there isn't much more to the story than that. I mean, so obviously there was a lag between what he did and what I did. But what I was saying was that I'm sure he wasn't paying attention to me at the time. This was a deeply emotional thing for this guy. He was, he was crushed, obviously. But the whole point of the story is that this is one of those situations where no matter where you stand on these kind of things, in my view, it's not the time to bring it up. I wasn't going to sit there and tell this guy, look, I'm an atheist, and this whole thing is just not for me. I refuse to do it. So I did it, and in a sense, I'm glad I did. I'm glad I could be there for this guy in the only way that he would have needed me to be there at the time. Some of you might disagree with that, and I'd understand if you did. I think from an objective standpoint, I can see why someone would take issue with me making that statement in particular. But I'm kind of glad that I did that for him. And I never ended up telling him that I wasn't a Muslim. And at the end of it, the story continues, but that's the part that relates to your question. So yeah, that's me.
Wow, that's quite an experience. I think it's amazing that you did that for them. First of all, that's not just the prayer thing. I don't know how hard that was for you. I don't mean to diminish that, but just the whole process and how you help that family is amazing. Personally, I would do the same thing, but I always err on the side of relationships as opposed to I don't know, whatever might be factual in the moment.
Sure.
But that's me. I understand why other people make different choices. Did anybody else want to chime in? I know we had some technical stuff and people dropping out and coming in. Oh yeah, Erasmo Erasmo missed the last part of the story. Does anybody else have any? Erasmo, I know because, and I'm somewhat familiar with Mexico, and I know Catholicism is absolutely pervasive in the culture there. So how does that work for you in your daily life? Or honestly, my experiences in Mexico are probably about 20 years old, so it might be a little bit different now. But how are your daily experiences? Kind of just how you relate to people and how that affects you.
Okay, I can answer that. First of all, can you hear me? Sound clear? Okay. Well, if you came here 20 years ago, you will probably have visited a more Catholic Mexico, or at least a Mexico who had more importance regarding religion, at least on a constant basis. Right now, Mexico is still one of the most religious places in the world, and Catholically speaking, of course. But people won't appear to be Catholic, or you won't catch them doing religious things as praying before eating, praying after eating, go to church every Sunday, be respectful to others, be modest, be humble, yada yada yada. But if you start to act as different from everybody else, you will get somewhat attacked by other people, even including your family. At least not directly, but as in the form of recommendations or things you ought to do, you ought not to do. For example, I always get in a fight with my mother after we finish eating because I don't want to pray, or I don't want to say thank God for this meal we just had. I instead tell to her, thank you, Mom, for preparing such a delicious meal. And she gets mad because of that. And what I did is just avoid saying anything at all after eating, because even though it might appear to be disrespectful, I avoid getting in a fight with my mom. And I just, in regard to the last story of Andrew and Ren, I wanted to talk about an experience I had with a job. Well, I wasn't working per se, but back in the university, we were invited to hear, how do you say, a session from a person working in an important school, an important elementary school of the city. But it had a religious status, a really religious Catholic status, in which they had to pray before entering class, praying before starting each class in every hour of the day, before starting classes, after starting classes. They have special days in which they had to pray. And one comment of the guy that bothered me and disgusted me a lot was, with more or less the exact words he said, some of you might not be me, how you say, okay with religion and such and non-stuff, but it will make the children shut up for a few seconds, and that disgusted me. That disgusts me so much because it shows the hypocrisy of the current Mexico. I mean, they will act as if they were atheists, and how and in an image of the picture we are depicted as non-moral, disrespectful people, people who will not care about others, who just be so self-centered. And I don't know. It, it you can see I was really affected about this discussion, this session I had back in the university, and I just wanted to share it with you all.
Thank you. Has anybody else experienced, just by maybe even show of hands, has anybody else in conversation gotten the impression or been directly told that atheists are worse people, less moral people? Yeah, I've heard that a lot too, and it actually really always surprises me because I don't run in a circle of religious friends. I don't live in a really super religious place, and it's still, there's still an expectation, even from some of the people who are, they're not religious at all, but they believe in a God or some higher power or whatever, and they believe that basically all good people have to have that same sort of experience. It always throws me for a loop. I want to let, and we can, there might be some stew on that a little bit. There might be some stories about that particular problem that we encounter as well. I want to give Ray a chance to share some of his experiences.
Alright, so here I live in Indonesia for 18 years until now, and you see, okay, so for 18 years I lived with my parents. I thought they loved me. They treated me like their best child, but then I realized that their love was only because of their religion, Islam. And so when I opened up about my atheism, they disowned me, so I had to find a job so I can earn my keep. So here for so many months I have applied for 1, 2, 3, 4 countless job applicants, and every time I have to, here in Indonesia, yeah, maybe in some other country as well, the form of religion to be filled with one of the 6 major religions in Indonesia. For those of you who don't know it, there are Islam, Hindu, Buddhist, Catholic, Christian, and Confucianism. Other than that, no other belief is accepted, especially atheism and agnostic. So like, I had to hide my atheism when I applied for a job. Like, every time I hide it, they demand the truth. I mean, look, this form must be filled, so tell me the truth. When I opened up about my atheism, they just kicked me out right away. So it's just hard for me to find a job. One time, I really wanted to work in a ramen shop, a Japanese noodle shop owned by a Japanese guy. So I sent my letter of applicant. Then he interviewed me. The first sentence he said to me was, "I cannot trust you." And I was shocked. But then he said that this form religion it's unclear, your name it's blurry. So I said it to him that I'm an atheist. I hope you understand that people's belief has nothing to do when we're working. It's like we're humans. When we work, nothing else is mixed. You don't so like I don't know. It's just too shocking, but I don't think that the people around the Japanese guy accept me. So like I was kicked out of the ramen shop. I just realized that in Indonesia, tolerance, even in working, means nothing. Like the majority is Islam, and the rest of the belief are considered, as what Andrew said, second-rated, second class. So like every time during Friday, when the afternoon prayers come, all the shops are closed, and of course the people with different beliefs from Islam must stay quiet, uh, and it's like, geez, you need to respect my belief. It's my time to have a big pray. So like, just stay quiet, don't do anything, and uh, I think it's just so damn confusing. I right now I have a job as a chef in a Japanese and Korean restaurant cafe, and luckily I got accepted without even telling my atheism, because I know if I told them I would get out again. But then the bad news is that this cafe will close down in about few days left, and I have no other job. So like I can't apply for a job in Indonesia because people think even in working, religion comes first, which does not suit me well. As for what I believe, religion has nothing to do with your job, with what you work at. It's like there's no tolerance here in Indonesia. Excuse me.
That's
Here in my
very
cafe,
very frustrating. I'm so sorry that
yeah.
you're experiencing that.
Okay, so here, this Arabic words are being placed in literally many sides of the walls, and it's like they considered this restaurant to be blessed, or I don't know. It's just because of the power of the power of the numbers. The people here believe that Islam will Muslim people, the prayer of Islam will bring fortune upon the shops, but I don't think so. And again, I don't understand why must religion be put into the most important aspect when it comes down to working. So like, I guess I'm going to start a new job. I'm gonna make a new job in entrepreneurship. Like I'm gonna sell a chocolate. I'm gonna make chocolates and sell it so that people have no right to question my belief. And I think that's something I can actually do. I have to work on my own because no one's supporting me anymore. And I'm still 18 years old. I'm just a kid. For damn sake. I think that's all I can tell you right now.
Thank you, Ray, very much for sharing your experiences. I know it's extremely frustrating for me to hear it. I can't even imagine how frustrating it must be for you to go through it. As a parent, I am even more infuriated by your situation. Andrew, I think, wanted to, I saw a hand, and then I think it might be a good idea for just, if we just want to open up. We've had a couple of great stories, and I feel like I want everybody to have a chance to just respond and share their thoughts, so we can just kind of open that up. Andrew, go ahead.
Well, actually, Makisha, I was going to ask you if you had any stories. You know, you tend to, you know, you facilitate these things and you do a great job of it. We never really give you a chance to tell us anything. So, do you have any stories on this?
I don't have a lot of stories about specific. I grew up very Christian, and I was actually heavily into Christianity into my adult life. So my time at work was actually I was still a Christian. Now I can say from that perspective, there were definitely, I think it was more for me the things that I experienced where people, it was in conversations, you know, people in the lunchroom or whatever, everybody's talking about their baby's baptism or somebody's funeral, and of course there's all of this conversation that's just drenched in religion. And even then I was keenly aware of how that must feel or appear to somebody who cannot participate in those conversations, at least honestly. But I don't have a lot of experience directly with any sort of discrimination or any sense that there were, you know, that it was a problem for me. Mostly because since I've actually been outside of religion, I've worked for myself. So that's one way to solve that problem. It's obviously not always that easy, though. You know, Ren was talking about his experience. He still has to work. You've got to work. You can't just be like, oh, well, people aren't treating me right, I'm just going to leave. And I don't get the impression that anybody is suggesting that atheists should get any sort of special treatment for this, of course. But Ren also mentioned earlier that he would not expect somebody to be walking around checking people's crosses. I think he mentioned, you know, like to make sure that the wearing of their cross is not affecting their job or anything like that. And yet it seems to be perfectly fine to do that to people who aren't religious. So that's a frustrating experience, I think, for a lot of people, and I find it constantly baffling. Thank you for asking. That was nice. Does anybody else have any stories, any feedback on the stories, any encouragement for our friend Ray? I did before I do that, there was somebody in our team who mentioned in a place like Bangladesh, he said there's no point in firing you. Being an atheist, you wouldn't get hired in the first place, which was sort of a comical way of putting a really crappy situation. Again, I mentioned this last week. I think it escapes us sometimes how hard it is for atheists in some places. So those are good things to hear. Any other thoughts? You can just unmute yourself. Armin, go ahead.
Bangladesh, I just want to say Bangladesh is becoming, I don't know if it's becoming more or is it becoming more visible than before, but it seems like one of the worst places right now to be an atheist. If you're open about your atheism, job security might be maybe your personal safety becomes even more important than job security at that point. It seems a lot of people are having to leave Bangladesh or are at risk of getting hurt when they're open about their atheism. Just even people that didn't declare their atheism or just a little bit critical about religion have had threats against them. So
I actually don't know much about Bangladesh, but I have noticed that in the conversations that we've seen around the community and the stories that we've been talking about. It seems to be definitely, yeah, like you said, I mean, I don't know if there are things that are contributing to it actually getting worse, or if we're hearing a lot about it right now, but it is not a good situation. Any other feedback or thoughts, questions? Questions for each other?
I have a question. So, like, we know now that religion has actually nothing to do with working, that we should let people understand that it doesn't matter about what we believe when we're working. We're just a human. We want to work, we want to live. So then how can we make people understand about such case, I want the people in this world to realize that. I think that's my question.
Well, I think you could remind them that even during the when the Islam was in power, it used to be much more tolerant of other Abrahamic religions than it is now. But actually, that's not a good excuse, because at that even when Islam was more tolerant, they weren't tolerant of atheists. I don't know. I don't really think there. I mean, if somebody is not hiring you because you're an atheist, I don't really know what you would say to that. I don't. It's people don't change their minds that easily. It's not. It's a slow process and convince them overnight. I don't know.
I think it's important that places. I was going to say I think it's important that the protections are in place for these at a government level, at a legal level, but that doesn't even make sense because all these places have these problems because of that. You kind of have to get to the people so that they can create the protections so that we don't have these problems. It's a very tricky thing. I think people who are really suffering under oppression in this way, I can't imagine how frustrating it must be, because it must feel like such a hopeless situation to be in, because there's so many powers that are affecting all of these decisions. Ren?
Well, I was just thinking that's a great question that I don't know if there is an answer to. People believe irrational things for irrational reasons, and they don't. If they were going to be reasoned with, then we wouldn't be in this situation already. They've never let facts get in the way before, so trying to explain things to them isn't going to be helpful. It's only going to push them further into their trenches. I look at what's going on with the U.S. Today. You know, we have a country that was founded on secular principles, very clearly secular principles. And today, a majority of Americans believe that the very same text actually describes a Christian theocracy. And they believe it. And you can't convince them. You can read the thing right to them. They've read it themselves. And yet they believe that that means you have the right to be a good Christian just like them, not anything else. That's what freedom of religion means to them, is freedom to be religious just like them. They absolutely cannot grasp the concept at all, and that's from the top levels. That's, you know, most of the people who are running our country now fit that exact description. So I don't know. I don't know that any level of education or educating people can even fight this. Don't really have an answer.
And in spite of its freedoms, America is still a place where people would not vote for an atheist president. And so that says a lot about the general attitude of people and why that is. Yeah, I mean.
Actually, I do want to suggest one thing. There's a lot of online jobs these days that people could, if they have the right skills there. And one of these places is Fiverr.com. And basically, as long as you have an internet connection, if you have any graphic skills, or if you have any audio editing, if you have any skills that you have that you could sell it over the internet, you could basically create for it, basically, and all over all your stuff, and that way, then maybe if you have a good reputation on some of these websites, then maybe you wouldn't need to get a job with any company. So that's one suggestion I have.
That's a good practical tip that helps a lot. The age in which we live, where we can do a lot of that kind of work. And there are other. It's not all creative stuff either. There's a lot of pretty straightforward kind of administrative type tasks that people need done. There's a lot of different things that you can get remotely, and there's a lot of people out there looking for workers from other places.
Yeah, any kind of job that you could do online for somebody, you could sell it as a gig on Fiverr. You could do research, you could do data entry. If somebody is good at grammar, you could do writing. If you want to write blogs for somebody on Fiverr, and you could start your own gig and start selling it. There are other websites that you could sell your skills to, but one of the most famous ones is Fiverr. I could actually add a link into the YouTube version of this Hangout. I'll add the link there.
And also, real quick, there's a lot of ways to get the education you need to get some of these jobs. Web coding is always going to be needed, and if you can write software, and you can actually learn how to do coding for not just for websites but also for apps and for software through free online classes. There's a handful of those. You can just search for those. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head what some of them are called, but there are all kinds of introductory classes online. Universities are providing free classes. There's iTunes has ways that you can access some of that. So if there's technical skills that people need in order to acquire these jobs, and entry-level jobs, actually, an entry-level coder, the pay is pretty good, and not a lot of people want to do a lot of that entry-level coding stuff. If that's something that you can see yourself doing, it's worth learning. Even if it's just to kind of get your foot in the door. So those are some practical things that maybe some of our listeners will find useful, and we'll put those links in the YouTube section as well when we post this video. Does anybody else? We're past our hour now. We take a little while to ramp up, and then we kind of really get going, and then towards the end. So does anybody else have any last thoughts before we close out? All right, I see everybody's microphone's muted and no hands. So I will wrap us up. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your stories. And those are always my favorite. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.